But to another politician acting badly. Ex-Prime Minister Paul Keating, again. Now, our current Labor Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, is in Germany to talk about a $1 billion sale of our military vehicles to the Germans and how we can help Germany be less dependent on the Chinese dictatorship. And after this, Albanese flies to Lithuania for a meeting of NATO, the US and European Defence Alliance, whose head, Jens Stoltenberg, wants to reach out more to countries in our area, like us and Japan and South Korea, again, because of this growing Chinese threat. And that has infuriated former Prime Minister Keating, who's been a huge pro-China shill. Now, Keating called Stoltenberg a supreme fool, and he blasted NATO for wanting to open offices in Japan, writing, Europeans have been fighting each other for the better part of 300 years. Exporting that malicious poison to Asia would be akin to Asia welcoming a plague upon itself. And he falsely claimed China has no record of attacking other states, unlike the United States, which is true only if you ignore China's invasion of Tibet and China's invasion of Vietnam in 1979, and you close your eyes and go, la, 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 la. Now, Albanese was forced to interrupt his tour to defend Stoltenberg and NATO from Paul Keating.
Jens Stoltenberg is a friend of Australia. I have met him on a number of occasions, and we need to remember the role that NATO is playing. There is a land war in Europe.
Joining me is the country's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan of The Australian. Greg, great to see you. Paul Keating's attack on Australia getting closer to NATO to protect ourselves from China. It makes a change of him attacking you, I know that. But your response to what seems to me something frankly unhinged.
Well, I agree with you, Andrew, and it's great to be with you. I mean, Keating is a sad, pathetic figure now. I think the Labor Party is wrong always to say he remains a great statesman, but everything he says on foreign policy is rubbish. Surely his status as a great statesman has long passed its use-by date. And this grotesque personal attack on Jens Stoltenberg, Keating always is full of personal abuse. I tell you what, if anybody in Australia behaves like Donald Trump with his personal abuse and his wild disregard for facts, it's Paul Keating. I mean, he claimed in his statement today that China is the biggest economy in the world. That's just flat out wrong. China is about 2/3 the size of the American economy. Anybody can look it up. It's greatly to Albanese's credit, in quite sensible NATO diplomacy that he's engaging in, that he simply repudiates and ignores Keating, who is attacking Albanese not so much from the left as from the past, although really it's almost impossible to follow Keating these days. I mean, he's become incoherent. I think he's generally a sad figure. I feel a lot of pity for him.
Well, I find it incredible. He's so attacking of the American democracy, and he makes no attack, no criticism, all the excuses in the world for the Chinese dictatorship. That is quite sinister in my view. Now, ignoring Paul Keating now, Albanese's visit to Germany and to the NATO meeting, why does that matter?
Well, NATO has some real serious business to deal with at this summit. It's got to find a way to get Sweden in past the veto of Turkey, and it's got to think about a possible Ukrainian membership in the future after there's a peace settlement of some kind with Russia, because a peace settlement which doesn't involve security guarantees for Ukraine will just be a pause for the Russians to begin fighting again after they've got their breath. It's very good to get NATO involved in the Indo-Pacific. A lot of the security issues now are global. There's a de facto alliance between China and Russia and their dependent friends and de facto allies, North Korea and Iran, and it needs a global response from like-minded nations. I think Albanese is making a modest contribution to drawing the Germans out of their strategic hibernation and acquainting them a bit more with reality. It's good that there are going to be more German troops participating in Operation Talisman Sabre. These are all modest incremental developments. They're not revolutionary, but they are all very useful. Germany is a like-minded nation to Australia, and it's good to have more security cooperation with it.
Yes, and it's interesting to see that Albanese has just announced that German troops will be training in exercises with Australian troops. That is a very interesting move and clearly a signal to China that we have friends that might come to our aid. Meanwhile, Greg, something really curious, to me, the double standards. Joe Biden, US president, he's getting attacked by the left now for agreeing to supply Ukraine with cluster bombs. Now, cluster bombs spread a carpet of small bombs over a wide area. Russia's, in fact, been using these cluster bombs since the start of the war, and I haven't heard a peep from these critics. But when America gives the same to Ukraine to defend itself, suddenly it's a big issue. Why is that?
Well, you're right, Andrew. It's a tremendous double standard. I myself am a bit uneasy about the cluster bombs, but because they inevitably leave behind a lot of unexploded bombs that become terribly difficult after the conflict. But my problem with it is a bit different. I come from a different angle. What the Ukraine war is demonstrating is the absolutely parlous, ruinous state of the Western armoury. The whole of the Western alliance together cannot supply one nation with the weapons and ammunition it needs to sustain this war of self-defence. Yet the war has been going for nearly 18 months, but we have not ramped up Western production. The United States is ramping up very, very slowly. Europe is ramping up very, very slowly. Absolutely nothing is happening in Australian defence industry. We're in our usual slumber of blissful nonchalance. And so, the Americans have to give them cluster bombs, which are not the preferred weapons either of the Americans or of the Ukrainians, because they're not producing enough of anything else to sustain Ukraine. Now, I just would note, China has not used one munition in this period, and the West is sort of got all of its arsenal is empty. Meanwhile, we still haven't decided which missiles we're going to build in Australia. We're still not building any surface combatant ships. We're having another review into when we're going to start. My worry about these cluster bombs is that they indicate the absolute failure of Western economies to get their act together and produce the kind of weaponry and platforms that not only Ukraine but the whole of the West needs.
I tell you what, if there is a conflict with China in the near future, that's going to be a real issue. As you say, China hasn't wasted one bomb, one bullet on the Ukraine war. Meanwhile, the West is depleting its own stocks at a rate where they've got to use approved cluster bombs now. Greg Sheridan, thank you so much indeed for your time. Thanks for alerting us to that.